Greetings, everyone. Rob Chassner here, doing a new channel at YouTube for the introduction of each of the books of the Bible. This video is going to be an introduction to Genesis. And so it's been said that if you believe the very first verse in Genesis, so Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, then the rest of the Bible is easy to believe. If you can believe the very first sentence in the Bible, then the rest of the Bible becomes very easy. Now, the word Genesis means in the beginning. We believe that Moses, inspired by God, wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament. So Moses is the author of Genesis. You remember that after the resurrection of Jesus, if you studied the New Testament, especially in the Gospel of Luke, there were these couple of guys that were walking home. It was called On the Road to Emmaus. They were all bummed out. And you remember Jesus came alongside of them and he said, well, hey guys, what's going on? And these guys said, well, we're kind of bummed out. We hope that this guy from Nazareth would have been the promised Messiah, and we're so disappointed, and things did not turn out the way that we wanted them to. And those scriptures tell us that Jesus began to tell these 2 guys all about the Old Testament. And Luke tells us specifically in chapter 24, beginning in verse 25, it says, he said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all of the prophets have spoken. Verse 26, did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? Then verse 27, and beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. And so we see Luke telling us the fact that this book, Genesis, was written by Moses and inspired by God. As we go through Genesis, how are we to interpret what we're about to read and study? Dr. Henry Morris said, quote, the only proper way to interpret Genesis 1 is not to interpret it at all. That is, we accept the fact that it is meant to say exactly what it says, end of quote. Now look, the Bible is not a scientific textbook. The Bible is not written in order to teach us about science, but rather the Bible is to reveal to us God's plan for salvation, where we have come from, what has happened to us, and what God has done in order to fix the problem so that we might get back on track within our relationship with God. When the Bible does touch on the topic of science, it's always going to be accurate. Although this is an introduction, let's take a look at verse number 1. Verse number 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. That's probably the most well-known verse of all the Bible, that in the beginning God created. Now imagine a more in-your-face kind of a statement to reveal God. Notice what it says, in the beginning, I was already there. You need to deal with that. There's no explanation here. There's no backstory here. And that is a great reason why you can have confidence in the fact that the Bible was indeed inspired by God. If this were written by man, they would have attempted to explain to us, all right, now this was God's dad, this was God's mom, this was God's grandfather, and so forth. And man would have given the backstory to all of this. But God simply comes onto the scene and says, look, in the beginning was me. The more you examine any subject, the fewer options that you have on what you're going to believe. And when you think about how in the world did we get here, how in the world did this universe come about, there's really only 2 options at the end of the day. For us to believe, now imagine you have a chalkboard hanging on the wall, and you draw a circle around the chalkboard, and inside that circle we would say, well, that is nothing. Well, no, actually, empty space is something. What is nothing? Did you ever think about that? What in the world is nothing? And so if you go back far enough and there is nothing there, your options are somehow life and the complexity of life, that it came from nothing. That is one option that you have, but science tells us that you cannot get something from nothing. There's no scientific law. There's no demonstrable process that would let something evolve from nothing. So science says you cannot get something from nothing. Now you go back as far as you want and there's nothing there, then how in the world did you get here? And the law of biogenesis states that life comes only from prior life. If you want life, you've got to start out with life. And that is the only way that you're going to get life. And so if you go back to the very beginning where there was nothing at all, well, then how do you get the complexity of what we see all around us if there's nothing at all? You will hear people say, and again, it's amazing at the depth of pride that lives within a man's heart who is at war with God, and they will suggest that you are uneducated or that you're an idiot, and if somehow you believe that we're here as a result of God's intervention, that somehow that we're created by God, these people will ridicule you, they'll call you names, they'll cut down your belief in God. Yet what's intriguing is you look at one of the most the greatest scientific minds in the history of mankind, which is Isaac Newton. He was the gold standard for scientific thought. And what does he have to say about this? And I'm quoting from Isaac Newton, quote, "The most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being," end of quote. So are you going to tell me that Isaac Newton is an idiot? Are you going to tell me that one of the greatest minds in the history of mankind is an absolute fool? Look, I'm only believing what Isaac Newton believed. And so you only have two options here. Either a power being has created us and brought us into existence, or you and I somehow have spontaneously generated, we're spontaneously generated out of nothing, which science, by the way, says cannot happen. Yet people believe in this spontaneous generation out of nothing because they cannot think that God is our creator, because that brings forth into their lives some form of accountability and responsibility before God. All right, I hope this has been helpful and informative. We'll have another video up here on the entire Genesis chapter 1 and so forth. Thank you for viewing, and good day.